I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily, where it is confession time. Now, if your place of work is anything like mine, I'm sure you too receive email after email from your IT department telling you not to click on external links. Perhaps you too have posters in your office toilets urging you to think of cybersecurity, of not inadvertently leaking confidential data, even as you're having a leak of an entirely different sort. And yet, which of us has not in a moment of madness found the cursor hovering over an obviously suspicious link and found our finger clicking away before the panic sets in? Now, thankfully, so far, I have not deleted the internet, nor have given the hackers access to my CEO's bank account. But others haven't been so lucky. So it is welcome news indeed that major ransomware gang Lockbit has had their website taken over by the National Crime Agency, the FBI and other law enforcement organisations. Joining us in the studio, we have our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, also our science and technology editor, Tom Clarke. Gents, good to see both of you.
Hi.
Tom, let's start with you. Who, what, where, why? There are so many definitions I think we need to get into, but Lockbit itself is a confusing one because it is both an organisation and it's a bit of software.
That's correct. And it's like everything in the world of in the hacker sphere, it's all a bit opaque and mysterious. And they do a lot of their business, obviously, on the dark web. They are a group of individuals who ran what was effectively a franchise. This was not a group of hackers who themselves targeted businesses or whoever with their software. They developed the software, the tools. They also developed sophisticated protocols for how to negotiate ransoms and how to get that money from your victim. But they offered that to other criminals in cyberspace, on the dark web, to then go ahead and do the targeting. That made them very powerful. They were scrupulous, apparently. They've been very scrupulous in protecting their own identities. They offer rewards for people who might be minded to out them, to expose people who might out their identities. And as I understand it, they also offered sort of payments for branding. People who'd get literal branding here, people who'd get a tattoo of their logo on their arm, be paid $1,000 that was advertised online. They looked after their brand, they advertised their wares. Other criminals would use it to carry out attacks.
I mean, it's a fascinating business model to me, kind of like the McDonald's franchising of ransomware as a service. So this would suggest that there is a degree of sophistication to this group that might not be accurately reflected in the kind of the popular conception of hackers as teenage boys sitting in their boxer shorts in their bedrooms.
Exactly. They were sophisticated. Not the software itself, the software tools that they used to get into systems and then exploit them were sophisticated. But yes, so was the kind of business model, and that made them this high-profile target. They were, according to what we heard from the NCA today, responsible for 25% of ransomware attacks in the last year or so. It was clearly working and was probably why they became the focus of this coordinated operation.
So Tom, explain ransomware then, because I'm familiar with the concept of malware, software that is bad, right? So what specifically did Lockbit do?
So ransomware attack is a particular kind where if there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but their MO was to gain access to your systems through a weakness in your cybersecurity, and then their software would literally find its way. And this was interesting about their software compared to some of these other attacks, which are coordinated by an individual who'll sort of spend time worming his way around your system, driven by an individual. This virus would actually spread itself. It would get access to files and then encrypt the data on any one system. And it would encrypt as much data as it could get access to, and then would send you a message. Usually it would appear on your computer screen when you booted up your computer in the morning saying, we've taken control of your system. If you want your data back, you'll have to pay us. And depending on the size of the business, and they do their research beforehand, the payment would be scaled accordingly.
Well, let's bring in Martin Brunt at this point. I mean, Brunty, given the fact we've seen over 2,000 victims targeted by this gang, this is something of a success, isn't it? For not just the National Crime Agency, but I think it was a multi-force takedown of this particular organisation, or at least their website anyway.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the National Crime Agency, which has its own economic unit, seems to have led this operation with the FBI in the States and a number of other international police agencies, something like 9 countries. It's a huge success. I mean, the test will be whether they've disabled it and got rid of it for good, or whether it's just going to lie low. And there are, backup servers that even now are being put into action. No word of that yet. And in fact, if you as a victim go on to that website now, you will find information that might help you get back your stolen data, or at least unencrypt it. For a long time, the law enforcement agencies, governments have been warning about the enduring threat from Lockbit. I mean, even as not so long ago in December, there was a warning about the continuing threat that it posed, and I suppose that did throw up the question: well, if it's that bad, if it's that serious, what's being done about it? And now we know what was being done about it. There's no detail on exactly how it was infiltrated.
Absolutely fantastic that they have seized control of this website. I mean, Lockbit themselves do say there are other servers. We wait to see what happens. But when you've got the Director General, Graham Bigger, Director General of the National Crime Agency, saying that ransomware is the most significant cyber threat to us all, it does rather beg the question: where are the arrests?
Well, often when we're told of NCA operations, it comes with a bit of footage of doors being bashed down and suspects being hauled off to police stations, and then 6 months later we see them in court. There haven't been an associated wave of arrests, but there have been some individuals who've been identified, and I think that's quite important because this whole cybercrime idea rather throws up the whole question of anonymity. People, by its very nature, people are hiding behind their computers to carry out these kind of attacks. But there have been, hesitate even to call it a handful, there have been 2 arrests that we've been told of so far. There may be more, but one suspect arrested in Poland, another in Ukraine. So that's a start. That sounds like 2 individuals who will see justice. The American authorities say that they've issued charges against 2 Russians. Well, the chances of, if those 2 individuals are still in Russia, as we've seen, our own experiences here of trying to bring indictments against Russians who've committed crimes in Salisbury and so on, it's impossible to deliver justice in their case.
I mean, Tom, just reflecting on that which we've heard from Martin. I mean, I've been going through Lockbit, and they even have set out their own rules, the rules that they will operate with. Yeah. They say that they are based in the Netherlands, but there is a strong suspicion that plenty of the people involved in this organisation may have come from former Soviet satellite states. The reason being that they don't hack in those countries, according to their own rules. So, what do we actually genuinely? What do we know about who Lockbit is, where they're based? And, I mean, tell me that this isn't just some Russian operation operating out of the Kremlin.
If you look at the kind of victims they attack, it certainly doesn't appear to have any political motivation. There are plenty of GRU, the Russian Secret Service, backed hacker groups. There were a couple that the FBI took down, a couple of indictments made earlier this year. A similar one from a Chinese, I thought to be a Chinese state-backed hacking group that was getting into critical infrastructure in the US. I think the FBI would not have hesitated to suggest state involvement with Russia, especially given how relations are at the moment with the country. You look at who they're targeting, it is global. It's not particularly based on any enemy of Russia. And really, the randomness of the sort of targets they're hitting suggests this is an entirely criminal commercial endeavour.
Is that not a consequence then of the franchise model, of the fact that they have farmed out this software to their, in inverted commas, affiliate?
Absolutely. It can be whoever's got a vulnerability, whoever you think you can take down from money, and then some sort of weird honour amongst thieves type thing. There was a case recently where the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto got taken down. Its data was frozen. They had to cease certain operations in the hospital. And this organisation itself said this has breached our terms, our rules. They reinstated Toronto sick kids' data straight away and apologised for this and banned according to the messages on these hacker groups, they banned the particular group that had used their software for that attack from using their systems again.
Is there any way of knowing exactly how much money might have been earned by these guys? Because presumably, if you're a private company or even a publicly traded company and you've had to pay out a fair old wedge to get your data back, you might not want to publicise that.
I'm sure the NCA, the FBI investigators can only really scratch the surface when they try to assess how much has been paid out, because there's a huge embarrassment factor. There's the breach of security. A lot of companies and institutions would certainly not want to admit that. The NCA and the FBI in their press briefing in the wake of this operation have talked about billions of dollars being made over 4 years, at least 4 years that they believe Lockbit has been operating. But for every $1 billion payout, I imagine there are much smaller payouts too. I mean, this really has been a get-rich-quick scheme for criminals.
Just give us an idea then of how this investigation has been conducted.
The NCA and the FBI were very keen to tell us what they've done today, but not so much how they've done it. But it sounds as though the operation has been going on for a long time. I mean, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, has talked today in the wake of this successful operation about how sophisticated Lockbit was, but he also makes the point that it couldn't outrun the long arm of UK law enforcement. So I think there's an awful lot of pride attached within the organisation, the National Crime Agency. But don't forget, this isn't something that the NCA and its economic investigators have done on their own. They've needed the expertise of the FBI, and they've needed help from at least, I think, 9 other law enforcement agencies principally from Europe, but other parts of the world.
Speculate just a little bit for us on how perhaps they could have been caught in this fashion. But also, on top of that, I mean, Lockbit responsible for a quarter of all these attacks in the last year. So knocking them out of the game is a fantastic thing. But there are still plenty of others doing this sort of activity as well.
Absolutely. I think one thing we could speculate is that they chucked a lot of resource at this. They've learnt more about using the same kind of tactics as the hackers themselves. I think there's a clue to that in the message that they posted, that the National Crime Agency posted on their website. It's almost mocking the type of words that the hackers use themselves.
It was very leaked, wasn't it?
Yeah, and have a nice day. It was clearly pointed to put that point across.
They pwned them, I believe.
I did actually try to ask a few people today, how could they have done this? And yeah, either they don't know or they're being pretty tight-lipped about it. And that would make sense because this is obviously an ongoing investigation. It certainly has been reported that there have been more offers of rewards to people who will defect and will give information. There was also an interesting defection from an important Russian hacking group recently, in the last couple of years. A Russian who had no sympathy. It was a Ukrainian member of a Russian hacking gang who fell out of politics and defected. Could there be information coming out as a result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? The NCA claims to have control of their servers. They've got access to some of these encryption codes which could allow them to release information. There'll certainly be some important intel they can glean. And don't forget, if ransomware goes down a bit in response to this, you'll just see another type of cybercrime be on the upswing. Crypto jacking is a really popular one at the moment, where people get into your computer and exploit it to mine Bitcoin, for example. That's a really popular and apparently highly increasing type of hack going on at the moment.
Oh dear. So what can we do about it? I mean, you pick a local authority, there will have been a ransomware attack. You pick an NHS trust, there will at least have been an attempted a ransomware attack. Are we really bad at cybersecurity, or are people just idiots clicking on links that they shouldn't be?
I think there's definitely a case where people with lax cybersecurity get walloped, and there must be a lot of kind of I told you so from their IT departments who've got their head in their hands. But also there are some sophisticated methods. I mean, anyone who looks at some of these latest phishing scams, clicking on the link. That is one very valuable method for groups like these guys to get in to systems. But there are also more sophisticated ways where they'll literally bombard a system. They'll target someone and literally try every single avenue with increasing levels of sophistication. I think it all comes back down to that same thing. The best cybersecurity systems don't get hacked so often. Big banks, although they're much less likely to talk about it, clearly seem to suffer less from some of these attacks. And like you say, it's often public sector. The US government found itself vulnerable to attacks recently from politically motivated hacking, partly because they were using default manufacturer-installed passcodes. No one had gone in and updated those. And it was, apparently it was right throughout US government. It was just an IT security failure that was being exploited.
A final word from you then, a final thought perhaps. I mean, in terms of law enforcement, domestically and internationally, have we paid enough attention to cybercrime? Or are we just catching up with it now, do you think?
I think almost inevitably we haven't paid enough attention, simply because I think the problem is that it is so widespread. I mean, we all work for a big media organisation. I think we assume that we are being protected by the best IT department in the business. But even our own IT department constantly sends us warnings about phishing exercises and so forth. I don't think you can be too cautious